the August 28th, 2024 Town of Littleton Board of Health meeting. Apologies for the delay. We were getting a quorum of our members present, so we will start off with our agenda. Present tonight are Dan Kane, Kevin Davis, and myself, Matt Wason, as well as our representatives Jim Greffy and Francis Daigle. First on the agenda is a 7 p.m. public hearing on 6 Porter Road. So who do we have in the audience for that item? All right, if you could
Hello, sorry.
and introduce yourself, name and address, please.
Yes, my name is Sarah Malio at 94 Harvard Road. I'm here representing the Chimatories at 6 Porter Road.
All right.
So they have they would like to finish their basement and add a large rec room down in their basement for their their 3 young children boys to play in. And as part of that finished basement, there's, a couple utility areas from where the utility rooms, the electrical panel and such are a bathroom, a little bar area for the kids to get a snack, place to, and a storage, an unfinished storage room, so they can still store some stuff down there. We're looking at the assessor's card and counting the rooms ourselves. We came up with 10 rooms existing. So adding another room in the basement, which is currently unfinished and now will be finished, will bring the count up to 11 rooms, which with the existing 5-bedroom septic should be allowed by right.
And do you have plans you can share with us?
Yep, I do. I'm sorry. One second. Okay. Can you see it? Okay. So, this is the existing basement, which is, as you can see, completely unfinished. And then we just want to finish it into one large recreation room with a unfinished storage space. Over here, a bathroom where the kids can rinse off when they're get dirty outside. Little bar and 2 utility areas for the furnace and the electrical panel.
And do you have, I didn't see it in our packet, do you have plans for the upper floors of the house?
Yeah, I do have existing floor plans here. The first floor plan and then the second floor plan.
And I know since this came to us before, can you zoom in a little bit at that and make sure we all agree on our room counts before we move past each floor here?
Yep.
So what is your count on this floor?
1, 2, 3. Oops. 4, 5, 6.
It's
I
labeled,
get
it's labeled living room.
it's not functional though. there's a lot of circulation space there. You can't really set it up as a living. It's a space. It's really not functional as it's labeled. I mean, we've got circulation coming here, circulation coming here. It doesn't really function as it's labeled.
We'll come back for questions. And can you show us the upstairs as well,
Yep.
please?
So up here we have 1, 2, so actually we were at 6, so sorry. 6. What was I?
That would be 7.
It's that we're at 7, sorry. Losing my track of my counting. We're at 7, 8, 9, and 10. These are both open to below.
Yeah.
And then we've got walk-in closet, bathroom.
All right. And before we now open up for questions, then can I hear from Jim and or Francis?
Jim, you're on mute.
I can start with that. I left the comments in the permit portal, and if we could go back to the first floor again, Sarah.
Yep.
I think when I was counting this, what I did is I didn't count the prayer room because I think it's just under 70 square feet.
You know, I think it might be 2.
And so what I did was I counted the living room, but not the prayer room because it was just smaller than the 70 square feet.
Okay. Yeah. I think it might. I don't know if the client can check out, just confirm that. But yes, I think that might be just, it was hard to tell, but in closer inspection, the dimensions are to the outside of the room. So I think it is just under.
So I had originally, when I had put comments in there, indicated that I thought it was also a 10-room, 5-bedroom house.
Yeah.
And then the original plan had 3 rooms proposed downstairs, so that was going to be the issue. But with the 1 big room finished, it puts the house at 11, which the 5-bedroom septic system would comply with the 5-bedroom septic system.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim. Francis, anything further?
I think it'd be helpful to see what the changes to the basement were made to make it more compliant with what you're looking for. Because there's a lot of comments last time on how the space was arranged.
Okay. Basically what we did is we took away the extra room to make it just one large room.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, that right side was walled off and identified
Yeah.
office / bedroom.
There was a
and then I
a
believe the
wall
main
here.
area was that also split into 2 spaces?
Huh?
Was the main area also split into 2 spaces with a wall somewhere?
No.
Okay. So I'll open questions from the board. Kevin Davis.
I have none.
Dan Kane.
No questions this time.
And Matt Wace in the chair. I have no questions either. Dan.
Just, I guess, a procedural question of how to move forward, that under our standard rules that if it's 10, this is going to make it 11, we divide by 2, round down, that this would still be in compliance. Do we need to take an action administratively here? Do we need to order a deed restriction or any other action? I'm just procedurally, I'm just not positive, but I think this would fall under standard piece, but perhaps Jim or Francis has input.
I would say, given that the room/bedroom count complies with the septic system permit, if these were uploaded and as the proposed plans, normally I would have signed off on them as kind of a standard practice.
Yep, heard Dan. He would have signed off on it, but it is now here as because it's a continuation from the prior plans, which we did not approve. So
Right.
it leaves us at the will of the board. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the building permit. Double check with Jim and Francis on this one. For construction of a finished basement at 6 Porter Road as presented.
That seems appropriate.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Roll call vote. Kevin Davis,
Kevin Davis, yes.
Dan Kane,
Dan Kane, yes.
and Matt Wason votes yes. Plans are approved. Thank you for presenting.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
This brings us to our 7:05 public hearing on 510 Great Road, courtesy of Evan Carloni. Good evening.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. Evan Carloni, Innovative Septic Design. Let's see. Would you like me to, I don't think I have an option to share my screen here. Yes, I do. Okay. Go share. All right, can everybody see that okay? Yeah. Okay. So again, Evan Carloni, Innovative Septic Design. I'm here on behalf of the owners for 510 Great Road. This is a private drive off of Great Road, next to the police station, near that storage facility just off of 495. We have an existing 4-bedroom home with a failed leach field. We are proposing to replace it with a Presby. The request tonight is the approval of a 2-foot reduction to the groundwater table, resulting in a 3-foot offset with a percolation rate of less than 2 minutes per inch. So high water table, low perk rate. We are proposing a 3-foot offset to have the system be gravity fed, as opposed to implementing a pump chamber. The 2-foot offset also returns the yard to essentially very close to what's existing right now as well. And so, yeah, that's it. That's their request. Presby system with the 2-foot offset. No local upgrades on this one.
Thank you. Jim, your input? Yep.
These are good sized lots off that common driveway. And so there's lots of area there. Again, adding the addition of a pump chamber adds kind of a maintenance issue to the house or item to the house. So given the house size, given the few houses that are down there, it's town water. I think it's a reasonable request. If you were to bump that up, you may actually end up having to do some filling within the 10 foot of the lot line. So again, it kind of ticks a number of boxes to kind of have it designed the way it is.
Thank you. Anything further, Francis?
I have no comments.
All right, open up to the board. Dan Kane,
You were able to do a perk, you said? You didn't need a sieve analysis?
No, yeah, perk was less than 2 minutes per inch.
Okay,
All sand and
that's what I
gravel.
thought, just making sure.
Yep.
Obviously, you're right next to Beaver Brook there, so I just wasn't sure.
Yep.
Yep, no, I don't think I have any questions this time.
very well. Kevin Davis,
So we have no local exceptions, and as Dan said, a perk passed.
Correct.
Okay, nothing further.
and any abutters or members of the audience who would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. Doesn't sound like it. I also have no questions on this one. What is the pleasure of the board?
I make a motion that we approve the plans as presented.
Would you add detail as to what that's referring to?
The plans as presented for 510 Great Road for a Presby system to be installed on property.
With a
With the
2 foot reduction in
with the
groundwater?
2 foot
offset?
reduction in groundwater offset?
Sure.
I'll second that motion.
We have motion and a second. Roll call vote. Kevin Davis,
Kevin Davis votes yes.
Dan Kane,
Dan Kane votes yes.
Matt Wason votes yes. Plan is approved.
Great. Thank you very much. Everybody have a great night.
You too.
That's why I was asking the question about no local whatever.
So Title V allows for, so the approvals for the Presby system, these IA systems, so Presby, the GeoMat, built into the approvals from the state, the designer, the applicant can ask for a 2 foot groundwater reduction. The state hadn't really figured out the best process for that, but it says they may ask the local approving authority for it. It's not a by right. And so that's why it makes it kind of a clumsy process. So.
And it's not a requirement. They could put the system in without that offset technically.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, and I have no idea why my camera is going in and out, guys. As technology tonight is against me, so.
That's concerning. You're my backup tonight.
Yeah, this is great.
Okay, that brings us to our 7:10 agenda item, public hearing on the Board of Health Code of Conduct. Now, there is a copy of the Code of Conduct in our current packet for this evening. I'll state, as I've stated previously, I not wild about pushing forward a lot without more members of our board present. But we do have a quorum. So would anybody like to start discussion on this?
Yeah, I'll look. I went through and read through the packet and looked at the information that's in here. I think it incorporates a lot of the information that we talked about beforehand. But I too agree with you that I think having a few more members of the board before we vote on this, I think would be most appreciative.
Dan, do you have any thoughts to share?
I think a lot of the language pieces we've discussed have been addressed. Just as far as shifting it from kind of the generic select board template boilerplate that they work from. I think most of those have been addressed. I think the language regarding our relationship and our working relationship with Francis or the whoever sits in that office is better and appropriate, that every time we want to talk to Francis, we don't need to go through the town administrator, which from the select board, that would be the appropriate route for us. That seems unreasonable. So I think that's been addressed. I certainly still have a little bit of a concern. Not that I would anticipate it, but for, hold on, I'm scrolling. 3K, never publicly criticize an employee of the town, concerned about staff performance and only made the town administrator through private conversation. Obviously, I don't anticipate that would ever come up. But at that whole piece of how do we, what exactly constitutes publicly criticized? I'm just not sure where that line is. Obviously, I think we all know when you're either end of the tail of the bell curve, but where in the middle of that do we hit going, hey, we're really disappointed that, something didn't happen as requested. If we said that in a meeting like this, would that be considered publicly criticizing? And I'm going to pick on Francis because he's here and he's our guy. But I'm going to say, hey, Francis, we asked you to produce this piece of work, whatever it was, and that date has come and gone and come and gone and come and gone and hasn't happened. That could come across as criticizing. And I'm not. I'm using you as the example. I apologize. But so that could come across as criticizing a public employee. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out how do we incorporate accountability or differentiate between holding folks accountable and not publicly criticizing, and how that line is. Obviously we can recognize the obvious examples, but where does that line fall for we've asked for some product or something, it hasn't happened, we have a concern with that. Again, I'm not sure if every time we ask for something that we need to go to the town administrator, hey, town administrator, we asked Francis for this piece of paper, he didn't produce it, can you talk to him? I don't think we want to get into that either, because that's not good process on anybody's level. I'm just not quite sure that language, I understand the concept of why it's there. I'm just not sure in practice, how do we really operationalize that in a meaningful way when we have supervisory, for lack of a better term, supervisory responsibility, certainly collaborative responsibility with the town employee. I just don't know.
Thank you for that, Dan. I also had that one flagged to discuss, and mine was a more simple. Our email is not considered private, it's public record. And so if it says I cannot do it publicly, then I actually have no recourse other than a phone call, perhaps, which I'm not wild about, because I think that's not the right practice. And I also saw this as truly any employee, not necessarily just our health director, but if we have some problem someday with a health agent that we have that's an employee of the town, you're right. How do we deal with that? So I think with two of us commenting on this might be a punt back to Francis to say, what do you think, and how can we wordsmith that 3K to be a little clearer? That I like the idea that it's not just a line item that's saying don't do, but I think a line item that says how should we do would go well with it, so that it gives us the guidance not only of don't do it this way, here is the proper and expected way to do it. And I personally would feel like that should be an email, even if that's public. But Dan's right. There's also the question of where is the line between what is considered that kind of remark that's considered negative or public criticism.
I would say maybe just narrow the scope of how it gets introduced. So maybe say the board through the chair will notify staff in writing. I don't think the public in writing, I think you kind of have to do it through email.
Yeah.
So
Actually, the more I think about it, I understand the intent behind it, but I think it really draws into practice some sticky wickets, and maybe striking it completely. I don't know.
Or maybe it's because this is a code of conduct, that if any of us were to breach it, it becomes a vote and a discussion on how to deal with that. Perhaps, I want something in there. I like the fact that it is there, but maybe instead of making it a very concrete, never publicly criticize, it should instead say something along the line of, board members will do their best to not, or will, try not to publicly criticize staff members for the town. Because then it's a code we're trying to follow, to be respectful and try not to call somebody out. And if one of us does it, then the rest of the board can vote to take action upon that behavior.
as I'm looking at, I'm trying to think, like, even from the select board side, is that theoretically, anytime any department head or town employee is before them and I could read this really strictly, that anytime they offer any, we're disappointed that we didn't hear from. We're disappointing. This is the first we've heard of it. We've asked for, like, it seemed like almost any interaction that the select board, which is kind of where this came from, could potentially have when they're holding an employee or a town employee accountable during a public meeting, not an executive session, would theoretically or potentially violate this line. I'm having visions if we have the town engineer before us with something and we have a concern with, either information they presented or, I will share that certainly I was disappointed during COVID when we had the police chief basically say, I'm going to choose not to enforce this town bylaw. That, if I were to say, I disagree with that choice, is that in violation of this or not? That, again, where that line is, and I think for us, less so, because our relationship, our interactions with town employees are certainly much more limited than some other departments and certainly the select board. I guess that whole piece of, again, how do we find that line between holding accountability for employees and not publicly criticizing? It's really a hard line. And if every, like, and how did that process? Does the employee say, I think you violated your code of conduct, I want to vote in the discussion? Is it at the vote of the chair or the body itself? Is there a motion? I guess it just, the whole process is just really potentially cumbersome.
So let me throw out that we make the language a little less concrete and maybe something along the lines of the board members shall avoid like directly criticizing employees of the town. Because you're right. I think there's a difference between criticizing a person versus criticizing a document, data, a policy, right? Those, we should be able to criticize those items. And ideally, a person doesn't take responsibility for that. But on our meeting, we would want to say something along the lines of, we have problems with the such and such plan, not we have problems with Bob who wrote the garbage such and such plan, right? And so I would like to keep something in there at least. I know Kevin Davis might still say, let's try to take it out. Let's save the utmost removal for our discussion with more members. But if Francis, you could kind of tweak the language, make sure something's in there, try to make it less firm, and like I said, perhaps something that directs it more towards the personal criticism, not the work or the documentation or whatever else it could be.
Okay.
And then Dan, no, I mean, from reading this, I don't think that a town staff member would have recourse if they felt criticized, because that's not a part of how we would enforce this code of conduct. It falls on us as a board. I think in a circumstance like that, I assume if there were an issue, that employee would go through the hierarchy of town administration, and one of those individuals, I assume, would then contact the chair or the board to try to maybe resolve that offline or have something come up at a later meeting. I would be okay with that kind of process, but that might also be something that we, I don't know, debatable, that we could add to our own code of conduct on enforcement of how would we handle potential outsider reporting a breach of our own code that we don't recognize.
And I think we're all kind of thinking of this as in this venue. That, if I'm out at, XYZ restaurant talking to somebody and I make a comment that is considered criticizing, I'm not acting on behalf of the board or as a member, but I am still kind of bound by this code of conduct. So that would only be reportable if either I self-reported or someone else reported it through the chain that came back to the board and then action or not. So I think having that piece of, I think having it there is reasonable. I think you just want to maybe wordsmith it a bit that it allows our First Amendment rights while not having us be able to weaponize our elected positions. I don't mean it quite that aggressively, but that kind of piece of saying, do you know who I am? Fill in the blanks and words after that statement. I obviously way on the end of the curve of the bell curve, but that piece is going to happen unlikely in this setting, but is foreseeable potentially from some member of some elected board here in town at some point, and that obviously would need to be addressed.
No, it's fair. And we've had members of the audience come to meetings and say, I am not here on behalf of my official elected position. I'm here as a community member instead, so that I can speak as such. So, I agree. I think there's a certain piece of this that this is applying to our formal, obviously official meetings that we hold and communications that we have. But if it's a one-on-one meeting outside of this, yeah, I think that would be a different situation. The only other thing that I wanted to raise is the phrasing, and we have to just kind of make sure this is clear. Francis, you changed some of like administration to director of health, which makes sense when it's talking about like the town administrator. Are there any times where we use the phrase administration still, where what we are referring to is not necessarily the what's considered town administrator, but basically the Department of Health or the health department? Is that, and if that's the case, should we call that out more clearly or make sure we're referring to that way? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I believe I caught them, but I can give it a double look. I think most of them would only pertain to the director of health, except I think I put one that just said staff.
So yeah, so like 2B says recognize and support the administrative chain of command. Do we mean the town administrative chain of command or the health department administrative chain of command?
I guess it could mean both depending on the situation.
So I think those were it was like 2A and 2B where I just was wanting to make sure, because it 2 starts with a member in their relations with the town administration should. And again, is town administration, are we talking about kind of going back to that 0.3K? Is it everybody in town or the town administrator's office or the health department, I guess? So maybe just a reread of that, and if it's something you feel unclear, then we can bring it back up, I guess.
Okay.
And make sure we know what the real intent is there.
I think this is still kind of residual boilerplate challenges from select board with a universal scope of responsibility to our more narrow scope and lines of communication that I almost see like get rid of the capital A for administration, and it's to govern and support the administration of the health department. Really, it's kind of rather than it's the administration of what administration small a of the health department. We're developing policies to govern and support the functioning of the health department, which we are.
I mean, I think
governing body of.
I think because we are, our own independent board, I think it may be appropriate to have things referring to overall town administration at times. I just want to make sure I didn't read it. I caught it enough and didn't go back enough to detail and say, is that the one area you want to say that or not? So if Francis, if you could just do a double check. I don't want to eliminate town administration or imply that all of the words administration should equal only health department. I just want to say, okay, which ones make sense? And it's more for me, if there's confusion because of the word, maybe we should just be spelling it out more clearly to say health department and town administration or something along those lines so that it's clear that we're referring to everything. And then my last piece I would just move for our next draft to go ahead and basically approve all of the changes that are something from select board to the Board of Health. Just say yes to all of those. Fair?
Fair.
Okay.
Agreed.
Any further comments, input?
I just had one. Dan, at a previous meeting, you had mentioned on 4C.
Looking. Yep. Okay. I would hope never, but obviously we need to plan for nevers. It's part of the process. So I don't think I've got an issue with that. I mean, we got a process. If
Okay.
the chair or another member has an issue and brings it up, other than it's Robert's rules are kind of hard with the chair is having a challenge for some reason and a member of the body decides to call this, it's, Robert's rules is parliamentary side is a little bit more challenging if it's not the chair calling for a vote for something. But I don't think I've got. Okay, so I'm my brain's clicking back to where we were. I think my issue, not issue, but my concern question was around removing an elected member from a meeting. And that, again, we're a bit back to that whole, what is unruly or disorderly mean? Obviously, we're a small board. There's only 5 of us. So, at what point do we say, that we remove someone from an elected member from a meeting? It's like, what that threshold obviously needs to be flexible because it's going to be a zebra. It's going to be an unusual case. I just don't know from authority wise, can we remove an elected member from a meeting? I just don't know. That would be, I think, my only piece of that. I think having a process to remove for cause from an individual meeting is valuable. I don't know what that next step would be after that. If you've been removed, is this, the red card, you can't come back for the next game? Or is this, I'm kind of, I'm not remember how many. It's been a while. It's been 2 years in soccer. So, and that would be the only other piece of like, okay, so Dan's having a bad day and I yelled at Francis and the board says, okay, Dan, you know what? We're benching you. You're done. Thank you very much. We tried to stop you. You kept going. Have a seat. What, if anything, is after that? Obviously, we can't remove a member from the board, an elected member from the board. So simply back the next round and continue on, which I think would be have to be what we would do. I don't know if there's a case for removing an elected member. I think for us it would have to be pretty dramatic in black and white, saying this is not your day and it's time. You need to step out. But I just don't know if the authority, just because we put it in there, if we have the authority to remove someone, I just don't know.
So if I could ask, was that a line that we added to ours, or was that in the original example?
I think that was there.
It was there.
Okay.
So I would hope that the
sense.
select board and town council would have looked at that and went, yeah, the body can remove a member for a meeting, not from their seat, but from a meeting.
Yeah. Let's have you double check that, Francis. Just make sure that is something we are actually within our rights to do as a board. I agree. I don't think we can impose a 2-game suspension after that. But I would like to see, we don't have to necessarily write it in the code of conduct, but if that scenario were to ever come up, I would hope that the chair, or vice chair, if it was the chair that was voted out, that the next in line takes it up with that person and makes sure there's at least discussion before the next meeting to figure out if there is anything that needs to be done, whether it's a discussion with other board member or an apology or a letter or whatever it could look like. As I said, I don't think we have to necessarily write that unless you other folks feel strongly about calling out the responsibility to follow up. And And then my only other piece was actually kind of the step back on that, looking at it is how can an initial warning occur? Is that any board member at a time can raise their hand and say, Dan, you're out of line again? Or should it be something where they ask the chair to make the call? And basically,
I think within Robert's Rules of Order, there are ways that you can address that. And then the chair has to appropriately deal with those requests.
Yeah.
So I think that
that's what I say. Do we want to write down that the way we want it to work is, is any board member giving that warning independently, or are they asking the chair to effectively give the warning?
I'd almost, it's a very weird workflow. I'd almost say anyone can raise an issue. Like right now, we're a body of peers. Yes, we have a chair, but we're a body of peers. That anyone can raise an issue. I have a concern with Dan's conduct this evening. Okay, so through the chair, I have a concern. The chair can then either take an action or put it back to the body for a vote. Do we, would we like to? We have a motion on the floor basically to issue a warning to Dan for his behavior. This is going to sound great in the sound bites. And then the body can vote and say, you know what? Yep, we have a 4-1 vote that the behavior was inappropriate and a warning has been issued. I disagree with what you did, and I still disagree. You know what? I have a concern that a warning has been issued, behavior is continuing. Through the chair, make a motion that we escalate this to the next level of concern and remove back to the body of vote yay or nay. I mean, it's awkward, but I think that probably is the only fair way of having the body vote, warning or not. And then if yes, and it continues, a second vote for removal or not. Again, it's awkward, but I think it's probably the only fair way. I don't know.
So to capture the first piece there, then let's add a bullet that says, at any point, if a board member identifies that another board member is in breach of the code of conduct, it is their responsibility to identify it to the chair or vice chair as appropriate and call out that breach has occurred. Next step is either what you were just describing is chair then asks for a vote of the board to decide if a warning should be delivered, or, and I'm leaning this way probably because nothing actually happens out of the warning, they got to continue doing something in order to have a vote to be removed from the meeting. Would it be sufficient for the chair to then to just formally say, board member X, you are hereby warned that you are in breach. Please, refrain from doing so, or please correct your action for the rest of the meeting. Would you be comfortable with that?
I mean, let's face it, it's not a 3-2 vote, but you've got someone bringing the concern or the chair bringing the concern on their own. But there is no action. Certainly, if it went to a next level, a vote can always say, we disagree with the chair's action of issuing this warning. We think the behavior was appropriate, and stop it there. So there's no adverse action against the member. Nope, I'd be okay with that as well. I think, as long as, I think I'd be okay with a warning either going from a member through the chair or from the chair themselves.
Okay. Why don't we draft it up? And again, we want the full board ideally to see all of this before we vote on it anyways, so we can have some further discussion.
Okay.
Did you capture enough, Francis, on what we were looking for?
Yeah, I'll workshop it and I'll get something to you.
Awesome. Anything else then on the code of conduct?
Nope.
Between meetings, Francis, would you like a specific board member identified that you could bounce specific code of conduct questions off of?
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Do we have any volunteers in the audience to do so?
Sure.
Kevin Davis has volunteered to be your code of conduct contact. Say that 5 times fast.
Oh, wait a minute.
Okay, so if you have any small questions or details or want to bounce some language off it, please work with Kevin Davis directly so we can help streamline this and hopefully get it wrapped up in the near future.
Okay.
This
Thank you,
is
Kevin.
a public hearing. Therefore, what is the will of the board?
Make a motion to continue.
Motion to
I'll
continue.
second.
And a second. Great. Roll call vote. Kevin Davis.
Kevin Davis votes yes.
Dan Kane.
Dan Kane votes yes.
And Matt Waston votes yes to continue. Thank you. Our next agenda item is 7:20. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong agenda. 7:15 on room count policy, correct? Again, there's some stuff in the packet. Francis, could you give us a little background? I know some of this came out of state environmental code. Is this all cut and pasted out of that, or are you creating some of this language?
The ideas are the same. I mean, in terms of like the definition, obviously that's pretty much copy and paste for the bedroom. Room count just made it a little more clear, but it's the same calculation in principle and similar explanations. I just tried to make it a little easier to understand. And then in the last meeting, the vice chair asked if we could look through new builds for the past 5 to 7 years. So I was able to do that. Unfortunately, we did not have an easy way to do it. So
I'm sorry.
I got all the new builds in town. I went to each one and calculated the foundation sizes for each. You're welcome, Kevin. So we went back to 2018. The average square footage was 1450.
Okay.
The largest we would have was 2,900, and the smallest was about 900. Median was
Sorry, clarification. The average square footage of.
a foundation.
Okay.
So each floor was, yeah,
The house the footprint of the house.
right.
Yeah, just to get an idea of what the average floor would look like.
So each floor, yeah. So the minimum is 9, the max is 2,900, the median is 1,450, and what was the mean was 1,450.
The mean was 1,450,
Okay.
and the median was 1,394.
Okay. All right.
I mean, I think we're back to that place where we kind of started, is that at what point does a 6 or 7 or 8 or 1,000 or 1,200 square foot single room, at what point is it hard for us to say a 1,200 square foot space is still a single room in a residential house? I mean, can it be? Maybe, but again, I don't know about you, but I could fit my first 3 apartments in a 1,200 square foot space. So
I also have kind of just struggled with a kind of a pure square foot. To use the one earlier today as an example, for me, fully enclosed basement, which only has a couple of daylight windows at the top, where you're finishing a big space, feels different than I'm finishing a lower level that has full walkout. I'm putting new windows in. I'm putting in a bathroom. I'm putting in a kitchenette, basically. Wet bar plus refrigerator, I believe was what was on the plan. Whether that space is 900 square feet or 2,500 square feet, to me, that feels just so close to an in-law suite or an apartment that do walls matter? Because that could just be a gigantic studio, right? And so, and again, remembering it's all about not necessarily what the person's doing with it today. It's about protecting the property and the community for the long term. So when somebody goes and buys that, we don't have a listing that talks about how great that downstairs could be for your in-laws or whatever it could be. We can't have that kind of reference. So how do we make sure that what we're doing is building that protection in? I've thought previously, is a good next step not necessarily coming up with, well, a room equals this, therefore we'll apply it, or should we focus actually on basements? Because for me, there's this difference between the upper floors where you're splitting a big room in half and putting walls up and adding some closets. Like, boy, those feel bedrooms or not. It's really the basement, I feel like, where the most of this comes up. And maybe that's just the examples I've seen over the past couple of years. But I feel like it's always where we kind of hesitate and go, wow, it's 1,500 square feet of new space you've got there, but this doesn't affect the size of your septic system at all. But I don't know how to best proceed with that. I'll throw that out there.
I defer to Jim with the history of it, but Matt, I think you're right. It's all basements. So
I think part of the challenge I've always had, and I guess we noticed it most at the beginning of the pandemic, is that all of a sudden people, because they were working at home, or people because they needed to. I mean, I remember doctors and nurses saying, "Hey, look, I want a space in my basement, so I have to go up to my family at that point." And so we've seen a lot of changes in the way that people are using their houses. So it really does make it a challenge. You know, I grew up in a house that was about 1,500 square feet. And so when the playroom now is 1,000 square feet for 3 kids, I'm just kind of going, okay, things have changed, but things have changed. And so I have a hard, and I think that's partially why you have the deed restriction process, is that it at least lets people know what the size of the septic system is, whether they read that or not. I would imagine at closing, you're not scanning and looking at in a detailed manner, but it's there. And so, you know, and you do have the building permit process. So if somebody were to sell that house and get another building permit to kind of enclose that basement, all of a sudden you can say, no, we approve this, and there's a reason why we did. I mean, so I think there's some checks and balances. And then I guess the last thing I would say is, you know, Title V kind of looks at, the design looks at 2 people per bedroom as the basis for the flow. And so if you look at a 5-room house, do I anticipate 10 people in that house? Probably not. So there are some things that change. That's why I guess I feel better about deed restrictions now than I have in the past, only because, you know, part of it is family sizes are smaller, so systems aren't being used to kind of their design max, if you will. And it's really hard, as you're discussing here, to say, is that big room just a playroom as they described? Or is it, you know, the makings of here's a wall? And part of the problem is I have a picture of what that was going to be. And so it could easily be that. So that's the challenge. But I think my thought is the deed restrictions are there for that reason. And then kind of the septic systems kind of have another factor of safety built in, because we're not seeing houses that have lots and lots of people. My concern, I guess, beyond that is if they're doing Airbnb, or if somebody's converting something, because we're seeing ADUs now. You saw the stuff in the state. So if that came in and someone wanted to make an ADU out of it, all bets are off. Then you're talking about putting a bigger system in or doing something with the system, because now you've got a couple of units potentially. So I think there's some safeguards there.
So I'm okay with everything that's written, and thank you, Francis, for going and jamming through foundation sizes and things. That's not my definition of easy, but that's okay. But thank you for it, because it adds actually an interesting conversation as we look at those items that are in yellow. And, adding rooms, finishing basements, every blank square feet of finished basement living space added will be considered an additional room. And so we go back to the thing that's, the one that we had this evening. And I guarantee you that sucker's at least 1,200 square feet that you're adding just by looking at that house. I mean, each one of those windows is, 32 inches wide, right? You got a double, so that's at least 60 inches wide. You got at least, you're looking at like 30 feet probably across, even though there's not any measurement for across, which I find interesting. And then there's, you've got 10, 16, 20, and almost like 30, another 30 feet, and it's an L shape, so I get it. But, I'm looking at it like, wow, there's a good amount of square footage just in that basement. And yes, I do understand, my daughter who is living in 92 square feet in a single dorm room. So I get it. But, I'm looking at this going, how do we define that? That's the reason why I was asking for this. So we can have a data-driven discussion about what constitutes, what size room are we going to say something larger than this means that it's 2 rooms. Because I agree with you. I remember what the plan looked like for the first time when they proposed that. I'm like, well, there's at least 3 rooms downstairs. So how do we do that? But at the same time, I'm also cognizant of, well, we've had some houses built in the last 15 years that don't have the same septic design forethought that some other houses did before they got rid of it in 2006 or 2008. So that's kind of where I'm stuck right now, because I'd really like to say, a 20 by 30 room, which is 600 square feet, should be the maximum that we think about, but that's my opinion. I can be swayed.
And maybe it's, I hate to say it because I don't like to be soft, but maybe it's creating a guideline for a room size that you could actually also apply to upstairs rooms as well, so that we get into the debates about, my full flowing dining room to kitchen to living room to family room, but there are no walls. It's one room, I swear. But as you look at that, I would love to, because we had that debate and we approved somebody's because this board couldn't decide on their nook as to whether that was big enough to be a dining room or small enough to be a mud room. And so I like the idea of having at least some guidance to say, you know what, kind of as a rule, because it's about precedence and not trying to just look at each one in a silo as well and say, listen, this is kind of what we generally use as our little calculator. Your big open space is this many square feet. So we think that kind of breaks down to X rooms solely for the purpose of calculating the room count. To Jim's point, maybe the thing to do is we could be a little more flexible on when to apply the actual deed restrictions, because we decide that this scenario is safe enough for the community and the owners and the future owners. And I think that maybe that's why it's not the right thing to be too concrete about what the definition could be. Like I said, I still get stuck on the basements, and if somebody came to me and said, I want to chop up my basement with just the windows are only a foot tall because it's so far underground, and I want to cut it into 3 rooms, I just don't see that as ever being turned into more potential bedroom or living space, as opposed to, and this is not the first one, the ones that look like they are full-blown apartments on the lower floor with external access. And yes, Jim, if they ever want to officially turn it into an ADU, there's paperwork. And yes, if they ever officially want to do something, there's paperwork. But there's also nothing to be said. Somebody buys it and says, I'm not going to say anything about this. I just got an apartment to rent out. This is great. So that's the one. That's one of the ones that bothers me the most. And maybe it's something as simple as saying, listen, we're going to create a subset of rules or guidelines that are for, if you have an enclosed basement and you can't get out, then we might have some adaptation there so that we don't care as much about the room count in the basement. And maybe no matter how many walls you put up in your basement, we're going to count it as one room. If it has exterior access, we don't treat it as a basement anymore. We treat it as a main floor of your house. So we're going to apply the same rules as we would to the main floor of your house or the second story of your house. I don't know.
So as a bulkhead, and as bulkhead would, in my mind, would be an exterior door.
And that doesn't say the same thing to me as a double French door with a bunch of full height windows.
I understand,
Yes.
but
Yes.
that is an exterior door.
It is.
The other thing too, and I'm health code is not going to speak for fire code, but I don't know, and I don't know this, right? But if you've got a bedroom in the basement and you have a 1 foot by 2 foot window, me don't think that that's an appropriate window. I think you need to have one of the safety egress windows that have like the steps to climb out and all that stuff. So, I mean, I don't think that passes the giggle test by the building department. And I'm not in the building department. I don't profess to be that, but on things that I've seen, on other things that I've seen, that doesn't pass the giggle test from a building safety egress sort of kind of thing. So
I agree with it. That's why I'm saying if you cut that basement into 3 rooms,
yeah,
why should you consider it in the room count? Because they really cannot legally be bedrooms ever. Anything can always be misused, always. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. It's more of, again, when it gets listed for sale and some property owners say, I could look what I could do here. That's why I'm just not as concerned about those kinds of basements.
Yeah.
Because you're right, they cannot ever legally be bedrooms, as opposed to the ones where you've got enough of that window to be an egress or you have a full height door. I don't know if the bulkhead would count. I task you to talk to the fire department and building department to see if that counts as a legal egress if a bulkhead doorway is in your bedroom.
I've rented apartments where that's the case.
We can certainly talk to the building commissioner or the building inspector to, and just kind of get his take on that.
Yeah, I guess that's where I'm kind of and I hope you don't mind the free discussion point here. And I know we need to time box it probably a little bit, but filling in those yellow spaces, I know we need to, and I'm just trying. I'm looking at the numbers going. 20 by 30 is damn big. But that's my opinion. That's not, and like you said, 1394 is the median. So
Well, and even if it's guidance, Kevin, like you said, if we set a number, we say, listen, if it's above this, we're going to look strongly and potentially count as 2 rooms, FYI. If it's below this, it doesn't mean anything. You don't get to go to your upstairs and say, oh, look, this room's smaller than that, so it doesn't count. Because we still have the definition like we came with tonight, like the 70 square foot can be a room. So we already have the low point set. And we're just trying to give ourselves some guidance on the higher point.
Okay.
So maybe Francis should go back and calculate all the dining room square footages for all the open floor plans.
You're the worst.
Never mind, scratch that.
I didn't ask for that. I just wanted some data.
But something. I'm sorry I was out of town that week, Francis, and the vice chair asked for that data.
It's good data.
20 by 30. It's a number. It is big.
I mean, if we're trying to quantify something that is very difficult to quantify. We've already said, okay, well, if it's a walkout, then we may approach it differently than if it's a not walkout. And if you look at my house, which flows from my mudroom and garage at one end, that I've got an archway or two, but basically it's one straight shot from my garage to my fireplace. And it's really long and it's really open. And that counts as 3 rooms because I've got a kitchen, I've got a breakfast area, and I've got a very large living room. That's 3 rooms, but I go 12 feet lower into my basement and it's 1. So we want to be, why is it either side. Why does it count as 3 rooms upstairs but only 1 downstairs? Why does it count as 1 room or 2 rooms upstairs but 3 downstairs? Because we picked a number of 500 square feet, and now that's 3 rooms, but upstairs it only counts as 2 because the rooms are bigger, and this is how it's you. I want to make sure that we choose something that we can justify and support and apply consistently. Because if we're still doing, well, sometimes we will, sometimes we won't, we're going to look closer at it if we're still basically doing what we're doing now. But we've got something written down that someone's going to go back to says, well, your policy says this, and you did that. And now I have an issue with that and I want to challenge it. Again, I'm not quite sure how do we come up with something that is enforceable while still being flexible enough that we can do our job and be flexible and grant. Certainly, we can always grant a waiver to our policy, but we don't want to waiver to. If we're granting waivers to our policy on a regular, consistent basis, then it's not really a policy. If 50% of the time we're granting waivers, then it's not really a policy. A waiver should be the exception. It shouldn't be the norm. And when it's the norm, okay, well, then we obviously need to rewrite our policy. And I'm just not quite sure how do we make this usable for the residents and for us and defendable if we ever actually get pulled into court. You said no. How come? You made our people put in a new septic system when this policy said you really didn't need to. They didn't need to have done that, but you were more stringent than your policy. I just don't know how to make that work because with all of our room counts, even tonight with that prayer room, it was under 70 feet, so it was not a bedroom, but was it still a room? It's still being used. So how do you quantify again? How do we quantify even that discussion of, yeah, it was under 70 feet, so I didn't count it in the room, even though the 70 square foot mark is supposed to be for a bedroom? Because if that wasn't a prayer room, that was an office, and if it was 65 square feet and it's an office, would you have counted that as a room, Jim?
For the purpose of room count, I wouldn't have. So if I was yeah, because that one, yeah. I mean, unfortunately, that's a game that gets played when people come in and want to. And I kind of remember, I don't want to say a game, that didn't make it sound good, but when this house was being built, I distinctly remember that conversation about that prayer room, and I always go through the room count and bedroom kind of definition. So I think that's why that room was designed a little bit smaller.
It's 68 feet, therefore it doesn't count, or whatever it is.
Right.
So we have had people come.
Okay, nope, that's because I said
yeah.
3 inches
even in this
short,
policy, you would say that bedroom and talk about 70 feet, 70 square feet. So that piece of, how does that apply for other spaces as well? So it applies for any space less than 70 feet does not count as a room.
So, and to your point, Dan, about the kind of the open concept. I mean, we get that question from time to time, and you could see on that plan tonight, there was a good sized foyer there. So we wouldn't connecting like mudrooms. I don't count as rooms because they're kind of connecting spaces that people go through. They typically have stuff in it. They're storage. They're multi. I don't anticipate they're going to laundry rooms, same kinds of things. Utility rooms, obviously. But and again, I tell people all the time we try to exercise as much judgment as possible. So if you have a kitchen with a nook but a dining room, to me, the nook is kind of an extension of the kitchen use, where the dining room is kind of a formal thing. And when you start getting pushback, I will often say to people, how do you think the realtor lists this when they put it up on the, because you sometimes get pushback, well, it's not big enough for a table. I says, but I'm sure it would be listed as a dining room if you're selling the house. So again, open concepts gets to be a little bit of a challenge, but if you kind of explain that, I think people get it. So when they were talking about that living room space, it's kind of a strange setup anyway, but yeah, exactly.
I was sitting there saying, oh, well, maybe we define a room to have 3 walls, 3 contiguous walls. And then I went, oh, wait, open floor plan. You can't do that. And I was just like, stupid open floor plan. Why did we have to do this? But no, it's all good because I have an open floor plan in my house as well. So there's no easy way.
So I know it's only 3 of us. And I know I don't want to sound fixated on it, but should we actually just try to come up with rules for basements?
So I like the beginning of it. I like the the first part here, renovating existing construction. I like the idea of having that. I really do. Basement. Yeah, I have no problem saying, you know, I even rounding up to 1,000 square feet. Come on. I mean, what the hell? I mean, it's 50 by 20. That's, on another floor, like Dan was pointing out, on one of his floors, it's, 3 rooms. On the basement, it's considered one. So, what the hell? Or even the print that we saw here, it was 4 rooms or 5 rooms or whatever, right? I mean, that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm wrestling with the number because I think having the sections that we have makes sense. I think it's just the number. That's the thing that I'm having a problem with. Hence why I needed the data. Thank you, Francis.
And I think where I'm coming from is a little different in that I'm hoping for something that somebody in the community who wants to finish their basement can figure it out. If we know that basements are the vast majority of these things that we're debating, how can somebody go onto the Littleton webpage and go, what do I need to do for my basement? So they don't show up here because we had too many people who show up having these grand plans and we set them on fire. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to be in that position. And so can we be more clear? And that's why I say I agree. What we have written here is a great start for something, but is it actually the endpoint that we should be working towards right now? Or is it, and again, it's what I keep throwing out there. And so if people don't agree with me, let me know. But is it just having rules about finishing my basement that is more important to us right now? And you're right. Dan's example, it's 3 rooms upstairs and it's 1 down in my basement. I don't know if I care though, because if that's an enclosed basement with nothing other than a bulkhead potentially, why do I care if that room down there is 800 or 1,600 square feet? Because it is just a finished basement at the end of the day, and that can be done really fancy and really nice. But I don't see it as that concerning area where I'm going to now be fitting more people into the house.
So well, and then you also have like the one that we just approved earlier tonight. Not that I'm picking on that, was just an example. I'm not saying anything like that. But I mean, you could have a Murphy bed that pulls down from the wall, and then you're within compliance because you've got a bathroom, a pull down Murphy bed, and that's it. You can, whatever. So.
You said a good word there that I also, should we have a different rule if somebody wants to put a bathroom down there? Should that make us pause and think about it differently?
But traditionally, I mean, through my first term, we've all said bathrooms are excluded. They're not part of the calculation. They're just the bathroom. I understand it shows intent. I get that. But I also see the point of, just what the presenter said tonight. When the kids get done from playing outside, they want to have the ability to hose them down when they're covered in mud from head to toe.
But think of it this way. If I said, if you're going to finish your basement and all you're doing is putting some walls up, then I don't care how big the rooms are. If you're adding plumbing to your basement and you're putting rooms, finishing parts of it, now I need to treat it differently. Because you're right, bathrooms don't count in the room count, but when it starts to look like you're putting more systems down there, should I care more and say, honestly, you're now making it more like a regular floor living space, so you're going to have to follow the regular floor living space rules. Therefore, you're only allowed 1 room down there. And then maybe if we've gotten to that point, we have to start talking about what square footage it should designate then.
So maybe this is where, item D in the list, A through E above, electrical service and ventilation is the key to consider. This is different than just putting up walls and doing something, right? Because as soon as you heat, cool, and provide power to a room, it's improved, right? So if you create an improved room, we're going to count it as a room of livable space. So that goes to your thing of saying, okay, well, if I have a basement and I come and I have a fire pole and I come into the middle, right? And or spiral staircase and I come into the middle and I create 4 rooms because it's a perfect box in the basement, but only one of those boxes has electrical outlets. Because I think by code you have to have lights in each room. I think. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm at. It's like an you know, a light I think is a requirement for safety, question mark. But so that's kind of where I'm getting at. It's like, where do we, like you said, where do we define, you know, that, when do we start caring? Dan's being quiet. He made his point and is winning.
No, I'm at the same place of I love guidance because it provides consistency of application. And I think as a board, that's critical. We need to be consistent. It's the only way we can be a fair and impartial board to the best of our ability is if we have some standard. I just don't know how to create a standard that is consistently applicable. You know, I'm just off picking the ones we've seen off of our, you know, the last 6 months, we've seen a couple. I'm not sure how to make it so that we can apply it consistently to the wide variety of stuff that we see without just being arbitrary, which we may need to be. I just don't quite know what that number is, because we'll use Jim's example of it's 69 square feet. It's not a room. So, you know, are we going to have folks who say, okay, we're going to say 1,000 feet. Okay, so we finished our basement and it's 980 and the rest of it is storage and mechanicals and a bathroom, which doesn't count. So it's 1 room. Okay, well, they have met they've met our policy. It is what it is. Even if it's very clear that if they give us a picture with a bed in it and a bathroom and a shower and a walkout basement, by what we've just written, it counts as 1 room. It may count as a bedroom, depending on how it falls. They could have 20 rooms and it adds 1 more bedroom, but it still fits. It still works. I'm just not quite sure how to make sure it's consistent. I think that's my hang up, which is kind of where I started. I don't know how to quantify it in a way that is clear and consistently applicable for the wide variety of stuff that we see. A bulkhead versus no bulkhead versus walkout, escape windows versus not, 3 rooms because there's the bulkhead but not a walkout versus 1 room. We could come up with an enormous algorithm and a walkthrough of going, okay, where do I fall on this chart? And when I get to the bottom, this is 1 room, 5 rooms, 15 rooms, or no rooms because it can't be built. And maybe that's where we need to be, but we just need to make sure all those decision points that we pick along that algorithm are based in some kind of supportable idea, supportable concept, from safety, from something. So it's not just pulling it off the top of our heads. Yeah, well, we think if this is, it probably should be that. I can't imagine that we are the first people out of the 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts and the tens of thousands of communities in the United States to figure out when is a finished basement 1 room or 2 rooms or 5 rooms. I admit I have not done the research either. I'm happy to start trying to figure that out because odds are somebody has at least taken a stab at this before us. I don't know, certainly from Francis and Jim, from your experience in other places, has anybody local done this whole, like, how do we figure out what a room is? It sounds like a dumb question, but we can't be the only Board of Health or building department or assessor's office, somebody who hasn't gone, when does 15,000 or 1,500 square feet become more than 1 room? At what point is, how many square feet do we go, you know what, it's the world's biggest studio apartment. You know what, we need to really, that's more than, nope, it's 1 room, 1 bedroom, because I've got a kitchenette and a bathroom, which doesn't count. I've got a 1,500 foot 1 room apartment.
So in the towns that I work in, yeah, it's Title V that they use as the guideline, the definition of Title V.
So they would say it's 1 big room.
And if their drawings had shown a bed in that corner, and a dining table in the other corner,
Open concept.
what would we have done? Would we have said the main story rules apply, and that's an open floor plan apartment of 3 rooms? Or would we have said, no, we always treat basements as basements, and that's 1 room, you're good?
So that previous design, the reason I said 3 rooms is that's how I did it.
Oh, it had walls though, didn't it, Jim?
So
It did
yeah, if you looked at the Elevate, there was a room that was created on the long end of that. And there was
Yeah.
a TV and that was a media room. But then there were kind of dividing short walls that kind of, there was a gym behind it and there was a kind of ambiguous-y kind of kitchen-y area.
Yeah.
So again, it looked like what it looked like. And so when something looks like that, that's kind of how I would, again, try to use my judgment on that.
And
Walks
that's
and
why,
flags.
and that's why I think I'm interested in, I'll call them qualifiers, kind of like the list that's in there right now, talking about electrical and heating. I mean, I don't think electrical should put something over, because if you want to be able to use a room, you need electrical to do things these days. But do we add more qualifiers that talk about, like I threw out, plumbing? Do we start to look at things differently when we start to have plumbing or HVAC or bigger windows or whatnot? Things that you can't necessarily disguise or forget to put on a drawing. They can't forget to put the walls, but if they just give us a plan that shows all this open space and tell us a story about how it's going to be used, again, I don't care what you're doing necessarily. It's about future proofing that space to make sure it's used correctly perennially.
Well,
So
the fun
is
part,
that a
so
route?
the fun part that I actually like is that they went, and I'm going to pick on tonight, and I'm just showing it as an example. I'm not saying they did anything wrong. But the thing that's interesting for tonight thing is that I actually went and looked at the electrical, how they have the lights rigged up and where the switches were on the wall. And I went, okay. So we're doing this. I looked at it and I went, they really have wired it for one big room. It's not like they have a light switch and then they have another light switch that controlled this area and then they had another one that controlled only this area, right? They really have a light switch at the bottom which controls the lights, and then they had another one that did some lights in the first area by the steps for the storage area. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. So you can see what's going on, and then the rest of the area had a 3-gang and a 2-gang switch that controlled. There was not ceiling things that were being controlled, shall we say. So I was like, oh, okay, this kind of makes sense. So
You're right. That would have been a good spot if that lower right corner, for some reason, had lights on a different switch that was very close to that area. And, but I also don't want to get into that kind of digging for when you look at these plans either. To be
no,
like,
but it was
lighting process.
no, but it was something that I went through and looked at, and I was like, oh, they really are treating it as one space per the plans, right? And I'm like, okay, so it really wasn't a wink, wink, nod, nod. It really was, okay, we're doing it as one space. Here it is. And I was like, okay, cool. So I'm, I guess that's part of it. I guess that's where Jim gets into the if we look at the open concept, right? If I look at my upstairs as my open concept, right? When I walk in, I've got a light switch that does the mudroom area. Then I have another light switch that is for the kitchen. And I have light switches that are only for the kitchen. I have a light switch for the breakfast nook, but there's no other lights. You know what I mean? There's physical things that are preventing you. There are light switches or things that are like, oh, okay, it's for this area. There's a step into that area. Or there's a ceiling that's been raised or lowered. You know what I mean? It's the building cues, as Jim said. And I just want something that's easier so that way we don't get into the problems again. It's like, oh, this is 6.5 rooms versus 7. You know what I mean? I'm craving that, and I understand. I don't know. I'm craving that easeability for the basement.
So I appreciate
But also
it's gotten quite late. I think we should
Sorry.
move past this, but I also want to know what direction, and we don't have to, it's not concrete. This is a discussion. We don't have our whole board, but how do at least the folks here feel like, how do we want to move forward? You just mentioned, I want to have rules that are easy to follow. are we trying to make the rule book? Do we want to try to look at a subset? Do we want to, Dan knows and has talked about it. Sometimes it's hard to write a rule because it can be so constraining. And how do we come up with that number that goes in the yellow box? So what's next?
Thought and discussion.
We want to do this. But everybody on the board has talked about we want a better way to do this. We want more things that we can lean on. We want more things we can point to. And to Dan's point, they need to be rational and grounded. We need a reason for these things. But we're at a gap right now. So
Was this just a discussion or was this a public hearing?
this is a discussion.
I say we've kind of come to a natural conclusion. I think we need more time to think.
But yeah, I'm not digging for emotion. I'm trying to figure
I'm
out
not saying I'm
how
providing.
what do we do next? Like, do we want to keep working with the document that Francis has started and drafted? I'm not wild about the yellow box strict definition kind of thing. I'm not sure if that's where I would want to go, but
I think
when you like
putting
it,
some
Dan,
I think putting some flow to the document, like step one, per this blah 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 blah, just have like a little arrow beginning step one sort of kind of thing. Have some breaks in the document, I think might make it flow a little bit so it gives you a workflow. I don't know. We need to do it, but I'm trying to figure it out.
okay.
Maybe it's individual things like they were, like, if you have a room that's more than 900 square feet, you have to count it as a room for your septic.
Okay.
I don't know. I'll be quiet.
No, that's fine. And I think maybe because of where we're at, we might need to be moving forward in more than one way. Because I also don't want to just be like, well, this is the road we're on, therefore it has to be the road we're on. And I'm not sure what, Kevin Baker might say about it, or Gino Fratelloni might say about it. Maybe they also want a different direction coming at it. So maybe the right thing to do actually is we all kind of take some time to draft up what we feel is most important, or some things that we think should be included. To say, I think these are the top 5 most important things that we should be considering when it comes to room count, and give us something to work on. Discussion's great, but it's also not necessarily very efficient. So if we could take the time offline and do some individual work that we can consolidate with Francis's help, so the next time we talk about it, at least we could say potentially, well, here are some ideas, and this is the route we all feel we should go down now. That way we can be a little more concise with our next steps. Because I think we're still just too fuzzy. I see one head nod, and
Because I can support that approach, because I think we all understand the importance of it and the rationales for it. It's just, how do we? Again, we're kind of, I think we all agree that we need to. We just don't know what to do, and we're trying to figure out what to do. And I think we need a little bit more data and research, and bring it back to something we can hang our hat on and be defensible with how we got there.
So I would say we don't need to make a motion on it because it's a discussion, but I would say we push this out, not one meeting, but at least 2 meetings to give us some time. Are you wiggling 3? Okay. Or off topic, but on topic. Is this the kind of thing that we might want to like try to hammer through at a retreat?
I like that.
And I know we talked about trying to get a retreat in this fall, and the fall is rapidly approaching. So let's close this discussion and move on to our next agenda topic, and we can come back to talk about retreats shortly. So what I have next is 7:20 p.m. public hearing on private well regulation. I would encourage the board to maybe push this out. We had section 8 included in our packet, which I wanted to talk to everybody about tonight, to say that's the next sticky section. So let's all do our due diligence and do some homework on it, but our members are not all here and I want them to do it. So I will say it to you two gentlemen first. Section 8 is the next section that we want to bang out in the private well regulations. So I would like everybody to independently communicate and send Francis something along the lines of, here are the top 5 most important things for me in that section, and here are the things that I need changed. The way the discussions work, I'm concerned, is that we're only potentially discussing a sticking point for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 members. And I want to make sure that everything else that's written is actually okay. So that we know that if we're only talking about that one point, when we're done talking about that point, we're done, as opposed to, I personally think that A through G are all kind of out of whack, whereas Kevin loves them. That hasn't necessarily come up in our discussions in the meetings, if that scenario were to exist. So, like I said, be able to, just an example, Mr. Davis. If everybody's able to not just describe what they want changed or what they're concerned about, but also what they feel strongly about, that way we can align maybe and say, okay, we all feel strongly about these. Let's nail them. And now what can we develop from that? Is that relatively clear? Good. It was a subjective question. Then I will follow up via at least email, if not phone calls, with Gino and other Kevin to try to ask them to do the same. How long do you want to do that kind of work? I don't want it rushed. And whatever we compose individually, Francis needs a little bit of time, ideally, to kind of find some similarities so that we're hopefully not all over the place.
I'd say a similar sort of kind of thing, but maybe not retreat, but like 2-3 meetings.
Okay.
I'd say 2 meetings. I'd say 2. We should be able to do it in 2 meetings.
Love
Like,
your optimism. Dan, what do you think?
I think 2 is probably fine. That gives us a month to kind of pull some of these things together. I do want to say we do have 2 folks still in the audience, and I think this is our last big discussion point. So I have a feeling they may be here for this discussion. I've not seen hands or anything, but while I don't think we're I think it's safe to say we're not ready to act on this. And we are trying to get everybody's input into this. Perhaps, I know we're late, but do we want to give, if they have any interest, our audience members a chance to provide a few minutes of input each, just so it may give us, again, additional data points or thinking points, research points that we may want to consider as we are working on things to bring back. I'm not just an idea. I'm not sure.
Yes, absolutely. What we would be talking about is coming back September 25th to have kind of further discussion on that. Audience members, if you would like to discuss our private well regulations, there's a hand raised.
we have one. Chris would like to be.
Good evening. You're on mute right now, but go ahead and unmute and state your name and address for our record.
Hi, thanks. I didn't have anything. I mean, I support pushing this to the next discussion, like you mentioned, and I just wanted to ask, to your point, Matt, would I be able to write in any concerns, things I feel strongly about, similarly for the board to address, or would it be better for me to discuss live in the next meeting?
I would strongly encourage you to write any concerns that you have and get those sent over to our health director whenever possible. The sooner we have any sort of input like that, the sooner we can all, at least individually, because we can all individually read those communications and ponder things. That doesn't necessarily mean all of us come to the same conclusion, but at the very least we have that kind of homework done in our heads so that when discussion time comes, if you can make the meeting as well, terrific, because then you can provide that input directly in case anybody's misinterpreted it. But we've also all then had some time to digest that and maybe consider it in our own ideas and recommendations.
Okay, and in the section that you included in the minutes, that's section 8, it looks like there's been some revisions to the wording that were done there. Is that what we're assessing, the revised wording, or the stuff that was crossed out?
I would say it is all up for grabs right now because we
Okay.
have not approved those changes. But kind of the point of what I was talking about is I think we've tended to focus only on those changes. And I'm asking our board to actually do a really solid review of the entire section so that if there's an area that still needs some adjusting or people feel strongly about one way or another, I want to be able to capture that so that we're not just focusing on whatever the red word is, for example.
Got it. All right, that's it for me. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's all open right now. Nothing is finalized. So any input that you want to provide would be appreciated. If you do focus on section 8, obviously that's what we're going to be targeting next. That's not the button I wanted. So this is a public hearing. If there is any or no further discussion.
I'll make a motion that we continue the public hearing regarding the public well regulation to our meeting of, we want to go to September 25 to September 25th.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Roll call vote. Kevin Davis.
Kim Davis, yes.
Dan Kane.
Dan Kane votes yes.
And Matt Wason votes yes. And Chris, if you're still here, thank you for providing your input and thank you for being patient through our meeting. Perhaps I hadn't really thought about this, but in light of that, not that anything doesn't necessarily go off the rails, but Francis and Brenda, perhaps for our future agendas, we put public hearings all first before any discussions. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And I don't know if we've obviously pushed this one out, but should this actually be and this might be a Dan question, should we actually change this to a discussion for the immediate future until we actually feel like we're doing more? Perhaps not. I like the public input, and if it says public hearing, the public will come and provide input.
Because we are the chair. I can always, like I say, the chair can always have, open up for public comment for discussion item, I think, as well. But yeah, no, I don't think it's been a public hearing. I think we'd have to close the public hearing, which we could do, and then just repost it as one when we're
Yeah.
ready. But
I just feel bad for people who come to our meetings for a specific public
For
hearing,
this.
and we either don't really talk about it and punt it, or it's an hour late. It's those kind of. I'm trying to be sensitive. So we'll move on.
I'm with you. Obviously, since I'm the one who spoke up, we have some folks in the audience who've been here a long time.
Thank you for that. Give me now a minute or 7:25 on infectious disease support tool. I don't have anything to present because I'm not on my usual capabilities here. But I have some verbal reports to make. The arbovirus update for Littleton is still considered low risk for both Tripoli and West Nile virus, but you've probably seen news recently about Worcester County and somewhere else, I can't see that on my screen right now, that have had some human cases of
Plymouth.
Tripoli.
Yeah, there was
Norfolk.
Worcester County.
Okay, and so they're doing some spraying in those areas. Again, Littleton is still considered low, but a couple communities away are starting to see some risk go up. So for sure, we would encourage making sure you're practicing like good mosquito care. So making sure you're wearing a good insect repellent when you're outside. Try to make sure screens and doors are sealed well so these little critters aren't getting inside your place. And then monitor for any symptoms, which you won't necessarily have depending on the illness. But keeping those things in mind. I will ask Francis, do you know if Littleton is performing any spraying? I had a community member ask me and said they'd seen some vehicles, but I hadn't seen a notice.
So right now they're doing residential requests, so anybody can request to have an area sprayed. Officially, we're not having any larger sprays or any. Ironically, though, Amazon called today and they were asking about a larger spray because they're basically in a wetland. So that's something I got to talk to Central Mosquito about. Yeah,
Did you
there
send
were.
the number to Mosquito Squad. Is that Amazon? Can they do that?
It's 2 days, so yeah.
Okay.
I would highly suggest we spray the soccer fields, like the one behind the church and the other fields in town, because practices are starting now and they go through dusk. So any additional protections we can offer in those areas, I think would be highly suggestive. I know especially behind the church there, the soccer fields that are behind the church, St. Anne's, I know those are back right up to wetlands as well, as do the other ones in town too, for that matter. So they all back up to all wetlands. I think every single one of them does. Well, maybe not the field by the power plant or the power company, but anyway, the rest of them are all, you go out there right at dusk and you are instantaneously attacked. So we might want to think about how we get the Central Massachusetts mosquito control to just get an ATV or the pickup truck and do a bunch of loops, because I think it needs to be done personally.
That's a good question, Fran. Oh, were you gonna say something, Francis?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. So I'm going to be speaking to them tomorrow anyway, so I'll talk to them about what kind of activity is going on in Littleton. Just to give you an idea, though, so there were 69 triple E mosquitoes detected with the virus, and there was 262 West Nile virus positive samples in last week's report. So aerial spraying began in Worcester County and Plymouth County last night, and they'll continue to do it overnight until like 4:30 in the morning. So advisory to anybody out on the road.
This does seem like a good longer term program to kind of nail down, though. How can we handle? I agree. I think town athletic fields, for example, are a good target for something that we should have a plan for. And maybe it's not when we have a low risk, or maybe it is. But if you could kind of see how we could develop something for that. The fields behind the church are private space that are leased, so they might have to fall into a different category. And I don't know if that's just encouraging them to request it themselves, like a private resident would. But what could we do for our own publicly owned spaces that would make sense? So that would be great to do. And this season we could practice some methods.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing we might have to consider in the future is if in fact we do become a higher risk, the board's going to want to review if we should put any restrictions in place at public spots in town too. So something to keep in mind.
Good thought. The other piece of my infectious disease report would be about COVID, where the town of Littleton is seeing some increased cases. So for Middlesex County, we're at the upper end, which is where I not really want to see us. But I don't have current case counts. I just have per 100,000s right now. So I'm not sure what the numbers are. Jim, do you have some, or Francis, do you have some case counts that you could provide?
I do not with me.
I don't.
Okay. So it does look like it's having some uptick in our county and our town. Schools obviously just started, so transmission times can get a little better. Please make sure you're monitoring for symptoms. I know they've kind of backed off CDC recommendations for isolation, those kinds of things, but please be aware, COVID season might be a new thing that's upon us now. Get your vaccines if you haven't lately, but I think new vaccines will be coming out soon in the fall. That might be something that you want to choose. No, now? Are they out now? Okay. Kevin says they're out now. So please get your vaccinations done. I will start reporting on the vaccination data at our next meeting, so we can start keeping an eye on that ideally.
So yeah, I can report. You have one member in Littleton that has gotten his flu and COVID-19 new vaccine, So yeah, I went and got it at CVS. No problems getting it, signing up, piece of cake. Got one in one arm, one in the other arm. So tonight we're gonna be sleeping on our back.
So we have no data for this season. Last season, they were suggesting that potentially you shouldn't get both at the same time. But take that as you will. If you feel safer getting them both separately, that's fine. I care more that people are getting the vaccines, so please do so. Help yourself, help your family, help your community.
We also just received a shipment of COVID test kits as well in the office. So tomorrow there's going to be a press release on them being available at the department to pick up. And then that will also include, I'm going to put an informational flyer of what to do if you have symptoms and testing procedure.
Terrific.
Lights bulb. The federal government also said that the COVID test for the per household is going to be starting up again at the end of September, I think, if I remember right, in the middle or end of September. In that announcement, they specifically said you can go to your library to pick up tests. So I think we need to look at that announcement and make sure that if the announcement says library, town, government office or something like that, we need to make sure that the library either has them and is accepting risk people may be infected coming in and getting them, or we have to put something out saying, hey, the place to get them is down in the town hall, in the health office, blah, 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 or something like that. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Are they saying
Yeah.
that's a distribution choice other than asking the USPS to send it to you?
I think in the announcement, they talked about where people in the United States could get them, in libraries. Local libraries were one of them.
Okay.
So
So that would be interesting because obviously if it's mailed to your house, they kept really good track to make sure you weren't ordering 100.
correct.
But if they're advertising pickup, then that would be a different approach. Okay. Can you find it and send that detail along to Francis?
I'm looking for it right now. Just
On our list, we had, we're going to give them we already gave them to Elder Services, Town Clerk's Office, and then the library. So
oh, okay. Perfect. Problem taken care of.
Anything else on infectious diseases?
we also have a tentative date for the flu and COVID clinic for October 22nd, 3 to 6 at the middle school.
Good.
And that's for everybody in town?
All ages. We're also talking about maybe doing a separate senior clinic as well within the town hall.
So that would be Tuesday, October 22nd, tentatively. Pencil it in on your calendar.
Yep, everybody will receive a news flash once we have everything all set.
Terrific. Anything further?
That's all I got.
Very well.
Oh.
Administrative matters. We have 3 sets of minutes to approve.
One thing before that I will say is the carnival is coming back to town in September from the 5th to the 8th.
Oh. Hopefully it won't lightning storm this time.
We'll see how it goes.
Oh, the Rotary Carnival that we had they're coming back again.
Yep.
Yeah, the amount of lightning that showed up during that carnival, there needs to be better, much better.
We'll take that under advisement, Mr. Davis. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah.
All right, meeting minutes. June 12th meeting minutes. I believe all 3 of us were present at that meeting. Has everybody had a chance to review those minutes?
I've reviewed them. They're fine. I don't have any issues.
We have a motion then.
I make a motion that we approve the June 12th, 2024 meeting minutes as presented.
Second,
Motion and a second. Roll call vote. Kevin Davis.
Yes.
Dan Kane.
Dan Kane, yes.
Matt Wason votes yes. The minutes for June 12th, 2024 are approved. Next on the list is July 10th.
I wasn't present.
Very well. We will have to move the approval for July 10th off.
And then July 24th, the two of you were. So if we didn't,
And then we were not, so we have to move July 24th off as well. Next meeting agenda for those two, please. Then that brings us to our correspondence. I think the only one for sure that we all received was the letters that the town of Harvard, the various boards and offices in Harvard put together about the Neshoba Valley Medical Center closing. So Francis, I know you forwarded those along as an FYI. How do we feel as a board, as a town? Do you know if anybody in Littleton is organizing a communication effort or any other steps?
So occasionally I do watch the select board meetings, and I know they were talking about putting together some correspondence in response, very similar to Harvard. But I don't think anything's been finalized.
And Jim, put you on the spot. Do you know of any concerted efforts by either Neshoba Valley or anything to try to make a statement or a stand?
So we've been working through our boards in our towns, and they've been making statements, so.
Okay. Have they been trying to operate as just the boards of health making those communications, or rallying, kind of like Harvard did, the town to put together a cohesive communication?
AIR is the only other one I know of, and I think the selectmen and the Board of Health both had separate communications that.
Okay. Dan and Kevin, how do you feel? Do you have opinions, thoughts, ideas?
I think the closing is incredibly impactful on all of our communities, both directly losing that as a healthcare facility of pretty close proximity, but the ripple effects are enormous, both between employment, but also just even I'll speak as a EMS person in my other life, that the ripple effects on emergency services are going to be dramatic for our region. That while here in Littleton, we're kind of, Neshoba's our closest, but Emerson's not that much further away. Lowell's a little bit further away, but still a reasonable distance. For our impact, it's going to be really, as we're looking at Air and Shirley and Groton and Devons, for every time they take a patient that would have gone to Neshoba, they're now looking at a half-hour or 45-minute transport time to Emerson or Leominster or Fitchburg. What used to be they were, would have a patient and be clear and available to take care of another patient in half an hour, 45 minutes, is now going to turn into 2 hours. And every time that their ambulance is out 2 hours, that's going to mean someone else is going to have to come in and help them out when they're busy. So every time, Littleton or Groton goes into Air to back them up because they're tied up, that's pulling resources out of us, and that ripple effect just starts spreading out. So Westford's going to be coming into Littleton to do our calls while we have both of our ambulances in Air and Shirley is still taking care of the first patient. So, that kind of an impact that really is less obvious than we're losing the hospital, which is devastating. There's going to be a lot of other ripples that kind of affect a lot of other operations that aren't as easily visible. Now, as a Board of Health, this is literally an international company who has kind of gotten us into this position that the five of us and the town of Littleton really aren't going to change their minds I mean, there's no option. I would love to see the state take action because, truth, at this point, the state's the only body who really, the state and the bankruptcy court are the only two bodies who really can affect this. I certainly have no problem, being part of putting a letter of the importance of it. I'm going to be the cynic saying it's nice, and we can state all the things and all the reasons why it's a horrible impact for our greater community. But I also feel like, okay, great. So we reinforce what everybody else already feels, that it's horrible, devastating, disastrous, potentially injurious to our communities. But okay, what can we do about it? I just don't know. But I don't think putting one more voice out there is a bad thing. I'm just being a little bit cynical. I'm not sure it's going to make a big difference to the state house.
We understand. We understand that it might not wield much weight, but I agree. I think it's a responsibility to our community to make sure we are also heard, even if it just becomes another page in a stack of similar letters. So thank you for that. Perhaps, Francis, if you don't have the air communications, if you could get those either from Jim or from air, and then if you could kind of track, I don't want this to take too long, right? We kind of want to be prompt with this communication. So would you mind trying to figure out if and when the select board are going to intend to do something? And then in the meantime, would somebody want to at least start a draft of a Littleton letter from the Board of Health?
I personally believe the Board of Health should send out a letter, whether the select board does or does not. I think we should do our own. And I think it should be very, and personally, not representing the board or anything like that. I personally called our representatives in our area and said, this is wrong on so many levels. You're now causing some, like I said, what Dan had talked about. And, I got the thank you very much and, click.
Yeah.
Which, what else are they going to do besides take notes and present it to the person so that at least your voice is heard? Great. But I think coming from the board, I think it should be very strongly worded, like, the Littleton Board of Health strongly condemns the closing, or, I don't know if that is the right language, but something. I want it very strong. I don't want it, I don't want it would have been better if we figured out some way of staying it open. I want something strong, in my opinion.
And I was not implying that we would only send something if the select board. I was more just if they have a timeline that we could piggyback on and send letters together. That's all I was. I personally agree that whether they do anything at all, this Board of Health has a responsibility to our community to send some communication. It's just if they're going to send something as well, fine. Let's tack it on so it's one package from our town. So, Kevin, would you want to draft a response?
Sure. It'll have 4 simple sentences.
I can draft something if you want.
Perhaps, Kevin, you can draft your 4 sentences to give it to Francis to, maybe
Finesse.
finesse. Good word, Francis. So polite.
Like I said, I'm the. I mean, I've already kind of drafted it in my brain for a couple of weeks, and it is the Littleton Board of Health strongly condemns blah 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 blah. Demands the state to.
Got it.
Anyway.
And that's something if we can, unfortunately, get that sooner rather than later, so that we can by email.
I'll work it tonight, tomorrow, and he'll have it by Friday.
And so we
I'll follow up with the town administrator's office and let you know about the select board approach.
Thank you. I'm not aware of any other correspondence. I don't believe. Francis, is there something else we need to discuss?
I don't believe so.
That brings us to our board updates. Open discussion. Dan.
Kind of tagging on to the Neshoba discussion, that as of the last we've heard, August 31st is on or about August 31st will be the last day that Neshoba Valley Medical Center will be open and accepting patients. I do know that while the emergency department is open at the moment, they stopped admitting patients from the emergency department or from the admitting new patient into the facility as inpatient sleepovers a number of days ago, so that even if it is still open as emergency department, still utilize it if it is still a resource that we can utilize, but recognize if you do need additional levels of care or inpatient level of care, that they will be sending you to another facility. They are not keeping anyone in the building that needs to stay. So again, we're at the 28th, so only a few days left really at this point. Advice: if you have a primary care provider who is there, make sure, as you know, from the public side of things, reach out, make sure that you are able to still contact your primary care provider after the closing of the facility. Same with any specialties and stuff this week. Try to reach out and make sure that you have routes to contact any of your providers who may be there before they literally close the doors, just to make sure that you have continuity of care before that may become more challenging. So.
Thank you, Dan. Kevin, anything else?
I already mentioned it. I am one of Littleton's newly minted COVID-19 and flu vaccination recipients. So please, I encourage everyone to go appropriately get the new COVID-19 vaccination and flu vaccine for the season. The current ones that are out there right now are Moderna and Pfizer. The CVS in town has plenty of Moderna. My son, we forgot to get his scheduled for today, and my wife and I, we were like, whoopsies. They had plenty of open spots and stuff like that, so they were able to kind of do that. So anyway, that would be my report out. The other thing to think about is the wastewater levels across the state for COVID, and actually across certain areas in the country, are kind of peakish a little bit. So we might want to think about taking our own personal responsibilities to protect ourselves as we move about in crowded public spaces.
Thank you. Jim, anything further to add? No. Francis, anything further to discuss? The only other thing I want to bring up that we mentioned earlier is a retreat. So it's the fall. Francis, could you set up a poll or an inquiry? Maybe it's not even a poll to start, but try to figure out if our board members have good or bad days and try to start figuring out when we could possibly pull this off.
Do you have a month in mind?
Pardon?
Do you have any months in mind, like October?
Oh, I personally would answer that with just the soonest we can make it happen, but September is right around the corner, so it might be too soon. But if people are flexible and can make that happen, I think that'd be great. I think October would also be great. I wouldn't want to obviously push too much past November, I guess, because then we're in the winter and holidays, and
Right.
I don't want to lose traction.
Okay. Yeah, I'll think of something. I'll send it out to the board.
And then the last piece I had was something really good.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Pamela's iPad has been patiently waiting in the attendees area and just wanted to make sure that Pamela needed to address the board about anything.
Well, I try to think of my last point. If Pamela's iPad in the audience would like to discuss anything at this point, please raise your hand.
Just a well-informed citizen. Awesome.
And I cannot recall what my final point was going to be, so I will skip past that. I am done. And therefore, we're done with our agenda for the meeting.
Making a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second,
And we have a second. Motion to adjourn. Roll call vote. Kevin Davis,
Kevin Davis, yes.
Dan Kane,
Dan Kane, yes.
and Matt Wason votes yes. Thank you very much for your time. I apologize for the meeting running so late, but I thought we had some terrific discussion, continuing our work to make it better.
Thanks, everybody.